Good morning, everybody. Hello, hello. Happy New Year. If we haven't had a chance to say that to each other, thanks, Adams, for that. And apologies to those people in the parking lot just a few minutes ago when they saw me running in, wondering, what is this guy doing here? I'm normally not that last minute, but good to see you, and keep praying for Josh and Lauren. So, since I have the chance, and it's, we're not kicking off the money series till next week, I'm going to dust off something that I haven't really talked about for about, I think, 8 years, but it's this passage in the Old Testament that has always grabbed and caught my attention. So we'll get to that in just 1 second. So one thing about me, as you keep getting to know me, is I tend to notice when people get haircuts. I don't know why that is. Like, a lot of people are oblivious. I remember when my mom would get her haircut, sometimes my dad would seemingly not even notice, and she'd be like, "Does anything look different about me, Al?" And he would kind of not really know. But for some reason, now if I've never noticed your haircut, I don't notice everybody's haircuts. But somehow I tend to notice when someone gets a new style or haircut, for whatever reason that jumps out to me. And there's one hairstyle that I've always been fascinated. I've never been brave enough to try this out myself, but the mullet has always been a bit of a hairstyle. And if you don't know what that is, it's like business up front, party at the back, right? I'm going to show you a few examples of pictures in just a moment here, but the mullet has always been one of those hairstyles I thought, oh man, I wish I was brave enough. And so as a parent, I did the second best thing. When my son was about 5, I cut his hair into a mullet so I could live through him. And I remember Silas he struggled a little bit with speech in the beginning, so when he'd go to kindergarten, I guess he was in grade 1 then, he would call it his bullet because he couldn't say mullet. But this is what a mullet is. I have a couple pictures here for you. This is that idea. Now, in some ways, it's kind of, what's old is new again. These things come back again. So there's this one. You can see this guy definitely means business. Luke, if you go to the next one. This one's wrong for a couple of reasons. So we'll skip by it. But it's not just for men. So ladies, if you're wondering about some changes here, and then this one, next one here for you. It says, you can't really see it, but it says mullet. It's always nice to know you're better than someone. So if you're thinking of starting the new year with a new haircut. But the passage we're looking at in the Old Testament, if you have your Bibles, this all leads somewhere. Numbers chapter 6. Turn to Numbers chapter 6 with me. It will be up on the screen as well. But it is an interesting passage of Scripture where God is giving an instruction, an opportunity. He's presenting the people of God with a way they can set themselves apart in a special way, should they choose to. It's not forced. It's an optional thing. And it's something called the Nazirite vow, and it's found in the book of Numbers, which contains many laws for the nation of Israel with what it meant for them to relate to who God was. As they were forming as a nation, God gave them these laws. And so sometimes if you've ever read the Old Testament, or if you're new to this, let me just make sure we're all on the same page. There's this nation that grew that became the nation of Israel. And as they were figuring out their special relationship with God, God gave them, through Moses, their leader, a whole list of laws. Here's what it means to be set apart, to follow God. This is what it looks like to interact with other people, other nations. And it was a way of establishing this special relationship. And so if you're ever reading the Old Testament, or if your picture of what it means to follow God is based on this idea of rules, this is kind of where it's kind of grounded in. There are a whole lot of Old Testament laws and rules that the people of God followed and obeyed. And the Nazirite vow, which we will read together, was not something they had to do. It wasn't prescriptive. You didn't have to do this, but it was a special vow, an optional vow that people could undertake and choose to take part in if they want to. And part of it had to do with their hair. So that's where this is all going. It will make sense here in a second here. So Numbers chapter 6, we'll begin reading. We'll do it a little bit differently since I got just a couple hours head start on you this morning. So we won't have all the same slides that we normally do. I don't know. I tend to use quite a number of slides, maybe too many, depending on your preference. So I'm going on the other extreme. There'll be very few this morning for you, just for the sake of time as we were pulling this together. But let's read this together, and then I'm going to share a few things that jump out to me, and we will have an opportunity for you to talk with some people around you and just have a bit of a conversation, because I want to see how this Old Testament text maybe resonates for you. I do think there's a really important parallel for us to pay attention to, and what it meant for these people thousands of years ago to choose to be set apart for God, and what does it mean for us today as followers of Jesus to choose to follow and be set apart. So let's read this together. We'll pull some things up. You guys game? Everyone good for it? All right, here we go. So this is Numbers chapter 6, beginning in verse 1. I'm reading from the New Living Translation. You may have something slightly different, but here we go. Then the Lord said to Moses, remember, all the instructions, all the laws are coming from God through his leader into the people of Israel. Now, the Lord said to Moses, give the following instructions to the people of Israel. If any of the people, either men or women, take the special vow of a Nazirite, setting themselves apart to the Lord in a special way, and here's the stipulations then of this vow. They must give up wine and other alcoholic drinks. They must not use vinegar made from wine or from other alcoholic drinks. They must not drink fresh grape juice, and they must not eat grapes or raisins. As long as they are bound by the Nazirite vow, they are not allowed to eat or drink anything that comes from the grapevine, not even the grape seeds or skins. So as we keep reading, that's not the only stipulation, that's the first one. As we keep reading, I want you to think to yourself, is there ever a point in this vow, in the guidelines for this vow, that for you feel like a jumping off point, like I'm out, right? So as I keep reading it, I want you to pay attention to, is there ever a point where you're like, that's it, that's too much, that's too costly, I'm out. So this one, I mean, I don't know how much you love raisins, but probably at this point, no one is freaking out about this part. Although, raisins, grapes, maybe not such a big deal. Wine, though, again, not going too far down this road, but wine was a common drink that they would have. It was a way of also protecting themselves physically because the fermentation would kill off some bacteria and things like that. But that was having wine was part of what it meant to be in community, in relationship, in family. And so even at this point, you could say, okay, no raisins, no grapes, but the no wine part, it's starting to tip into this idea that I'm going to have to change something about myself and about the way I interact with other people and the way I do friendships and hangouts and celebrations and just daily meal time around the table. Something is going to have to change if I'm going to choose to be a part of this vow, to choose to set myself apart in this special way. So it may not seem like a big deal to us. I love those boxes of sun-made raisins. I don't know, it was always in my lunch. I love those raisins when I was growing up. I enjoy a good bowl of Raisin Bran. I don't know about you. I've always been an old soul. But this isn't such a crazy one, right? It may not from the onset feel like we're giving up too much at this point. But again, wine, common drink of the day, it's starting to tip into this, something's going to change and it's going to cost me something if I follow this down. Let me also just say that the length of time is a little bit ambiguous. So it doesn't specify how long the vow needed to be. So the Jewish oral law would say it was a 30-day period, but it could be longer. But it was up to each individual person to, I think, identify at the onset how long they wanted the vow to be. So the Jewish oral tradition and law would say 30 days, but you could specify longer. So there's some people that we know that took on this vow for their whole life. That everything contained in this, they would say, this is my whole life. They were going to follow this. You just had to live up to what you decided. That's the thing. Whatever you decided at the onset, you had to live up to. Here we go. Let's keep going on. Verse 5. They must never cut their hair throughout the time of their vow, for they are holy and set apart to the Lord. Until the time of their vow has been fulfilled, they must let their hair grow long. Okay, so if it's a 30-day vow, probably not that big a deal again, right? Although for some of you, maybe even 30 days, depending on your hair now, maybe that starts to feel a little scruffy or raggedy. I don't know. I'm sure there's some people here that the idea of, say you chose to do this vow for 6 months, the idea of having 6 months of growth, you would just welcome that, and your locks would grow and be luscious, and you would be all about that. There could maybe others of us, though, who need to keep it a little bit trimmed because as it grows, it gets unruly or you begin to look a little bit awkward or strange. I'm not sure. I'm not trying to make eye contact with anyone here, but you can just think about it, that the hair that they would grow was an outward symbol of their commitment and potentially also put them in a weird zone, right? And so not only would they not be consuming anything from the vine, any grapes or raisins or any wine, so that would change family dynamics, relationships, friendships, extended family relationships. But also now you're starting to grow, so now people are starting to see it, so it would be visible Like if someone who took it on for life, say, was walking by, you would be able to see that person and be like, oh, clearly they are someone who has chosen to do this and commit to this for their whole life. It would be an outward symbol of this commitment they had made. Let's keep going. Verse 6. Here's where it gets a little funky for us too. It says, and they must not go near a dead body during the entire period of their vow, even if the dead person is their own father, mother, brother, or sister. They must not defile themselves, for the hair on their head is a symbol of their separation to God. This requirement applies as long as they are set apart to the Lord. So this is where it's a little bit heavier. So now it's direct family relationships. And in this time, in this space, in this culture, families would live as extended units. So grandparents, great-grandparents, grandparents, parents, siblings, kids, nephews, like people would live in these extended family units. And so it was much more common for them rather than in our day and age where we don't necessarily live with people who are very, very much older than ourselves in our family. So the idea of coming across a family member who would pass away was more common and could happen for these folks. But it's saying that the vow of this commitment is so important. And the hair is the symbol of the special separation that even if their own father or mother or brother or sister were to pass away, they cannot have anything to do with it. They need to completely separate themselves. So now think about the dynamic. So maybe in the 30 days or 60 days or 90 days or 120, depending on what they picked, maybe there's like, there's not too much worry of anyone passing away. But if it were to happen, this is where it puts pressure on their commitment. Because now those that you would think are the closest to them, the ones they love the most, they're most deeply connected to, they need to pull back from because of the priority of their commitment to God, the vow they have made to God. Let's continue on. In verse 9, it keeps going about this idea. If someone falls dead beside them, if someone falls dead beside them, the hair they have dedicated will be defiled. So here's the consequences of coming into contact with someone who passes away. They must wait for 7 days and then shave their heads. Then they will be cleansed from their defilement. On the 8th day, they must bring 2 turtle doves and 2 young pigeons to the priest at the entrance of the tabernacle. The priest will offer one of the birds for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. In this way, he will purify them from the guilt they incurred through contact with the dead body. It's interesting. So there's like an association with sin and guilt now because the vow has been compromised. Then they must reaffirm their commitment and let their hair begin to grow again. The days of their vow that were completed before their defilement no longer count. So this is like a restart. You have to begin again. The symbol of that is you're going to shave off all your hair, whatever has grown. It's back to zero. We're starting again. Let's go. And they must rededicate themselves to the Lord as a Nazirite for the full term of their vow. And each must bring a 1-year-old lamb for a guilt offering. So, in these extended units, it was more probable, more likely than, at least for us, that they may come in contact with a dead family member at some point. You know, we kind of have sterilized this idea. I don't know the first funeral you ever went to in your family. My mom's mom, my grandma on that side, was the first family member, first funeral I went to, and I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. I was in that zone. We didn't really know her too much. And I remember going to the funeral, and it felt like we were going through a whole bunch of things. I don't remember much about it, but that does stick out. We'd visit her in the hospital. She had cancer. We'd been living overseas, so we had flown home to visit Grandma, and she had passed away a couple days later, and that was the first funeral. But generally, like funerals, we go to them, but we're not around them a whole lot. But in this time and culture, being around someone who had passed away was much more common. Now, that comment about drop dead beside you, you can talk about that a little. I don't know if anyone's ever dropped dead beside you. Maybe there's certain professions, like we have nurses in the room and doctors, like maybe in certain professions, maybe that is more probable. The closest I ever came, so I was in like my 3rd or 4th year university, and my housemates who I was living with, they were they weren't old, but they were a younger married couple who had invited me into their home. Story for another day. They had, I think, through their work, got a gift certificate to the keg or something. It was definitely the keg. So we were sitting there eating. They were treating us to this really nice meal. And it was a really busy night around Christmas time. And I remember someone walking behind, and they fell over and they hit the back of my head. and against my chair and then fell down right behind me. And then like everyone in the restaurant started freaking out and people were yelling like CPR and whatever. And I just kind of jumped into, I kind of love those moments. I kind of jumped into it. I was like, stay back. Like I was checking if there was a pulse. I'm like, there's a pulse. No one cracked that rib cage. Like I was in it, right? And then they called the paramedics. It was someone with low blood sugar. They should have had an earlier reservation for dinner, I guess. So anyways, they came, paramedics came, it was all good. We ended up getting a free meal and free drink. It was awesome, right? Like, but this person wasn't going to die, but that's the closest I've ever been to someone like out of nowhere just dropping onto the ground. So it's interesting that this is part of it, but maybe there was, maybe they just needed to make sure that if you're around and someone drops, the point of it all isn't the person kind of obscurely dropping down. The point of it all is that contact and proximity with a dead person nullifies the value of made, and you need to restart. That's the point of it all. Your dedication, your commitment to God in this vow is so important. It's so costly that even if your father, mother, brother, sister, or someone else were to pass or drop dead around you, you have to start again. And you have to make a sacrifice and an offering, a costly sacrifice in order to restart. That's what they would hear in this. Okay, let's keep rolling. Verse 13. This is the ritual law for Nazirites. At the conclusion, so whatever time you say you're going to do, whether 30 days or a number of months or whatever you do, at the conclusion of your time of separation as Nazirites, they must each go to the entrance of the tabernacle and offer their sacrifices to the Lord. Now note the number of things they have to sacrifice in order to wrap up this vow. A 1-year-old male lamb without defect for burnt offering, a 1-year-old female lamb without defect for a sin offering, a ram without defect for a peace offering, a basket of bread made without yeast, cakes of choice flour mixed with olive oil, and wafers spread with olive oil, along with their prescribed grain offerings and liquid offerings. The priest will present these offerings before the Lord, first the sin offering and the burnt offering, then the ram for a peace offering, along with the basket of bread made without yeast. The priest must also present the prescribed grain offering and liquid offering to the Lord. So there's all these steps they have to take. Then the Nazirites will shave their heads at the entrance of the tabernacle. They will take the hair that they had dedicated and place it on the fire beneath the peace offering sacrifice. After the Nazirite's head has been shaved, the priest will take for each of them the boiled shoulder of the ram, and he will take from the basket a cake and a wafer made without yeast. He will put them all into the Nazirite's hands. Then the priest will lift them up as a special offering before the Lord. These are holy portions for the priest, along with the breast of the special offering and the thigh of the sacred offering that are lifted up before the Lord. After this ceremony, the Nazirites may drink wine again. This is the ritual law of the Nazirites, who vow to bring these offerings to the Lord. They may also bring additional offerings if they can afford it, and they must be careful to do whatever they vowed when they set themselves apart as Nazirites. So as I'm just reading, it's interesting. When you read about the sacrificial system for us in this present culture and day and age, it feels so foreign and distant. It's so strange. The idea of all these lambs without defect, the ram, the cakes, the olive oil, cutting your hair, shaving your head, burning it. Like it can feel like that cultural gap is so large. But this was the practice. Before we have Jesus entering the scene and we have an opportunity to come before God ourselves through Jesus, before all that, the sacrificial system was the thing that God initiated as a way of helping people connect with God. It was this step-by-step method of dealing with the consequences of sin and following these laws. And so the idea, this would have been common for them, these ideas of sin offerings, grain offerings, cakes, all this would have been very common for them. For us, it just feels very strange, right? The thing I want you to point out is that for this list to be completed, for the vow to be brought to completion, it required this extensive list of sacrifices that was very, very, very costly. The average person would have no way of coming up with this level of sacrifice. And it hints at some really important things here for us. It hints at that for someone to take on this vow, most likely they would not be able to do it on their own. It would require that they had the support of family, extended family, community all around them so that they could meet the requirements at the end of it. During it, it's not too big a deal, right? It doesn't cost a whole lot other than relationships, or if someone passed away, it costs that way. But in terms of financial cost, it's not until this moment, unless you happen to be a very wealthy individual, it's not until this moment where you needed other people around you. You would never be able to afford this level of sacrifice, these number of animals and what was required in order to complete the vow. It was like, if you're going to do it, it's the ancient world version of like a GoFundMe. Like, I am going to take on this Nazirite vow. Who's with me for $50? And you had to raise all the funds ahead of time because you just couldn't meet it. And so it makes me wonder then, there's a few things that make me wonder. What if you couldn't meet those requirements? What if the people who are going to help you weren't able to help you? It makes me also wonder, like, who would choose to do this then? If it wasn't required, why would you choose to do that? Like, who's choosing this? And if you're choosing it, would you just, like, wouldn't most of us just pick, like, okay, I think we're supposed to do it. You know, there's some peer pressure, like Bob down the road's doing it. I better do it too. Like, I don't know, like, wouldn't you pick 30 days then? Wouldn't you pick the lowest level of requirement in terms of timeline? Isn't that the easiest thing to do? Like, who would pick this for 6 months or for a year? Or who would pick to pull themselves out of family relationships or the normal practices of the culture for the rest of their life? Who would choose that cost? Why would you do that? It makes me think about these things. How many people? How many people? Who would choose it? How long would they do it? Some things that make me kind of go, So here's what I want to do. We have some time left, obviously, and so I want to give you a few moments to talk about this together. Maybe this is the first time you've ever come across this Nazirite vow. I mean, the book of Numbers isn't often the place where people go, hey, let's just do some nice reading together. I'm going to vow to start my devotions and my reading with the book of Numbers. You know, like, most people don't do that. So maybe you've never come across this before. Maybe you've heard about this vow. It's kind of like this one little thing that's sandwiched in with all these laws around it. But it stands out because of what it means, and we're going to get to this in a few moments, of the parallels of this vow to discipleship today as we choose to follow Jesus. So here's what I want to do. I want to give you 4 minutes to talk with someone around you. If you don't want to chat, you don't have to. You can grab a coffee or use the washroom, bring out your phone. It's the universal sign, I don't want to be bothered. But we're going to pass around a few mics. I would really love to hear what is resonating, what stands out for you around this text. And then I want to talk about what I think this means for us here and now. At least some parallels. Okay, sound good? Go for it. I'll call you back together in just a minute. Go for it. Okay, I'm going to interrupt here. We have a couple of mic runners ready to go. So I'd love just to hear what of this text is maybe sparking your imagination, your curiosity. Maybe you have a question I may be able to answer, but whatever you'd like, just please jump in. We have, over here. Awesome. So for someone over here, Jeff has a mic. Just throw up a hand. We'll get one over to you as well. Good morning.
Good morning. Oh, gosh. We were just wondering about the lifespan commitment. How do you know, or like, was it the people around them who would have to do that final sacrifice to like wrap things up? Because if you're saying, I'm going to do this my whole life, how do you know how to do like the sacrifice to like end the commitment? Or did you just, if you did a lifetime commitment, you just didn't have
Was that like the loophole to
Yeah.
get away from
I can't afford it, so I might as well just do it forever. Yeah. I don't know the answer to that, to be fair with you. I don't know what would happen in those. I didn't stumble, to recollection, I have never stumbled across what would happen and how you would fulfill the obligation on that. I would imagine that if you passed away, it would just kind of end. Like, if a Nazirite dropped dead, the others would just stay away. Like, I don't know what would happen, right? Yeah, perhaps. I think part of the completion was those sacrifices, I believe, were required in order to bring the whole thing to completion. It was about an act of worship, of celebration, bringing the community together around the person and marking the moment. So if you were no longer alive, maybe the community would still do that on your behalf, but I don't know offhand if there was how those requirements would be. It's a great question. I don't know. In terms of the lifelong things, we do know that people chose to do it for life. There were some who have looked at like the passage where God calls Zechariah and Elizabeth's son John, who be John the Baptist, and he, if you know the things that he was separated from, so there's some parallels here. It was not a Nazirite vow that he undertook, but he had this special call on his life as well. But this one is about a predetermined amount of time that everyone would know what you were doing. It wasn't like secretive. It's interesting in this, you did not pull away. It's not like you made a choice and you went to some distant place or you lived in a cave all by yourself while you were doing this. You would do this while you were in the context of still all your regular relationships. You would still work. You would still be in your family. You'd still be in the neighborhood, in the community. You'd still go to not synagogue. You still go to the temple, the tabernacle. You'd still go through all these regular patterns. Everyone would know you were doing it, though, right? It wasn't a proud thing. It was just like it wasn't a secret thing. So, but to your point, again, I'm babbling. I don't know what would happen if someone passed away before fulfilling the requirements of that's outlined here in the passage. Yeah, it's a good question, good thought. I don't know. We wonder. I don't know. I can maybe look into that, and if I find something, I'll let you know. Anyone else want to jump in?
Question for you, to be a little bit of the devil's advocate this morning. How do I say this kindly without being too blunt? Like, in a way, to some people, would that not come across as a little like showboaty? Like, I am doing this. Like, did they believe that they got like was there a higher status in relation with the Lord? Like, to me, because it's not like, it's an outward showing, which is a beautiful thing, but would some people look at that as like, I am better than you because I am doing this kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. I think certainly that was, we humans don't change that much, right? Like, I would say for sure. I'm sure there was potential for others to look at someone who chose to do that and question their motives. Of course, if people do something radical at a choice to follow Jesus today, there could be people who would look at that and be like, well, why are they doing that? Flip side also, there could be people who undertake that vow with not great motives, right? Like that could also happen. That still happens today. There is a lot of people who maybe do things under the banner of I'm being faithful to Jesus, and the core motivation is we just don't know, right? Or maybe it's not great. So those are true. I think those can all happen. Those could all be realities. It's not a spicy thing you bring up. I think it points to human nature. I think we haven't changed that much. The thing I would say is, though, if entered into with a proper posture and heart, that was a significant vow for someone to choose to undertake. If their heart's in the right place. And the thing with the heart is that God knows the heart. Right? When Jesus talks about prayer, he often talks about do not be like the religious leaders who stand on the street corner and shout out their prayers so that they get their attention of everyone who's watching them. They have already received the reward in full. Because their motivation, the thing that's prompting them is to get the attention of the people. So go into your closet and pray. Do it in secret and quiet. Now, there could be religious leaders who pray quietly in public and maybe they're not looking for attention. God is the one who knows the heart. The point is, we need to check our heart. We need to understand, I'm sure for them as well, if they're choosing to do this, hopefully they had someone around them saying like, why are you choosing this? Like, are you in a good spot? Like, that's the role of community then, to come around people. But I don't want it to be like, well, I don't know about the motive, so we might as well never do anything costly, right? Which also can be a bit of my tendency. Like, it could be like, unless I know for sure 100%, I might as well not even try because maybe I have mixed motives. Well, we're always going to be mixed up about some things. The thing is, the part of discipleship is to try to have our heart as gentle, as soft, in front of Jesus as possible so that when we make choices, God knows our motives and we may stumble along the way, but we're stumbling forward in that. But I think that's really great that you raised that. I'm sure that happened then, happens now. It's a good check. Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, Robert. This is awesome. The next time it's last minute, I'm just going to pick an obscure Old Testament passage, and we'll just talk about random things. This is awesome.
See, Dorothy's not here, so I have no checks and balances.
Oh.
But we think this happened thousands of years ago. But having been a catering manager downtown Montreal at a kosher hotel, these practices still exist today with the Hasidim.
Yeah.
And it's quite fascinating having to work with rabbis and mashgiels and everything else and I've done them all, the circumcision parties, the engagement parties, the weddings, I've done it all for them. And these practices still exist today.
Yes, 100%.
And I mean, you see it on TV, praying at the Wailing Wall with their ringlets and their hats. All those customs and part of their culture still exist today.
100%. Yeah, for the Orthodox Jewish community, the Hasidic Jewish community, who are still waiting for the Messiah, who don't look at our New Testament as being the coming of the Messiah. They stop with the Old Testament as being their Torah, their rules, their law, their scripture. They would still, many of them would, if they choose to, take on a vow like this. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. That does continue. And you know what, there's parallels. There are, in our context, things that we may do as followers of Jesus where we say, we are choosing to do this as a sacrifice, right? Like fasting could be one of them. Or, we may pick different things where like we're choosing to do this for a set period of time in order to try to be shaped and move to be transformed in the direction of Jesus. There are things we can give up, spiritual practices, different patterns we may observe. So yeah, thank you. That is awesome. Thanks for sharing a few things. Just for the sake of time here, we'll move on. I want to talk about some of the parallels that stand out to me between this Old Testament text and what it means to be a disciple of Jesus, a follower of Jesus, an apprentice of Jesus here today. So first thing I want to note is that it's voluntary in nature. So for the folks back in this time period, it was a voluntary choice they could make in order to take this special vow and be separated. Not separated from the regular rhythms of life or their family or their community, but to be separate in order to lean into God. It was between them and God. It's a vow they made. It was a special honor to try to grow deeper in their faith and maturity and relationship with God. Similar today. Following Jesus is not prescriptive. You don't have to do it. We all know this, I hope. You don't have to do it. Perhaps you grew up in a setting or a situation or a family where it felt like you have to do it. But you don't have to do it. At some point, we all need to decide for ourselves, is this what we're choosing to do? When Jesus invites us to follow him, it is an open invitation for all people, but it is your choice. It is an open thing. It is voluntary. Some of you have made that choice, and you're freely and willingly saying yes to follow Jesus and be an apprentice of Jesus. Others, are you considering that? And so wherever you are, just know it is a voluntary, it's a free choice for you. Jesus extends this invitation to all of us, but it is voluntary. The Nazirite vow, you had to set how long you were going to do it for. The choice to follow Jesus is you're choosing to follow Jesus for your life. You're saying yes to Jesus for life, which is an interesting thing. It's both personal and communal. So as we already talked about, there's personal sacrifices and requirements for the person choosing to take on this vow. It's also communal. So for them, there's abstaining from certain things, how it affected the relationships, the family dynamic, what they would eat and drink, in terms of their physical appearance, their haircuts. For us as well, there's this communal element, personal. We choose personally to follow Jesus. We are following Jesus as an individual, but it's rooted in the sense of community. When we understand the birth of the church and the rise of the church and the way Jesus established his community to be his representatives, the kingdom of God, what it would look like for people to follow Jesus, he roots it in relationship of us together. You can't separate those things. Anyways, yes, they are personal and communal, and it's costly. So for them, there was the personal cost, the family cost, potentially not being able to be connected when a loved one passed away, needing to withdraw. There's a financial commitment. There was a cost for them. For us as well, when Jesus talks about what it means to follow him, it's an all or nothing proposition as Jesus lays it out. It costs you everything. He talks about taking up your cross and following him, this idea of surrendering your whole life to God. It's the way it is for us. There is this cost. This vow was this kind of an epic denial of self for a prescribed period of time. You got to pick that. To follow Jesus is this epic denial of self. You have to lay yourself down in order to be transformed and choose to follow Jesus. You can't live forever in this conflict of I want to live for myself and I want to live for Jesus. It just doesn't work that way. That's not what following Jesus looks like. But that is the battle we all daily have to face. Am I making these choices for myself? Am I going my own way, or am I choosing to submit to the way of Jesus? So question for you, what is it costing you today to follow Jesus? We're not passing mics, don't worry. But what is it costing you to follow Jesus? It's a really good question for you to consider. Maybe something you can talk about on the drive home or later this week, but is there a cost you're experiencing in following Jesus? In other eras of time, in other points in the church life, in other parts of our world today, there is a very definitive cost to following Jesus. One of the things about our Canadian culture, our North American culture, Western culture, if you say, is sometimes we feel like, actually, maybe it's not really costing me anything. What is that pointing to then? If we're getting underneath that, is there no cost to following Jesus today? Now you may say, well, I give, so there's a financial cost. Okay, let's let that go. We're going to talk about that for the next 4 weeks. Let's leave that away. But what is the cost for you to follow Jesus? What does costly discipleship look like for us today? What does it mean for us to be set apart for Jesus? It was clear what set apart looked like for them. It was outlined and described, and that's what it would look like. What does being set apart look like for you today? These are really, really important conversations, and I can't just say it looks like ABC for you because we're all in different spots. But it is costly. I will tell you that. It is costly, and it should be costing us something. So a few thoughts. Maybe it is time for you to make some personal decisions about what it means to say yes to Jesus. Maybe you've been on the fence for a while, you're not sure. Maybe God's been kind of working in your life, and this is a time for you to say, I'm going to say yes, and cross over that line and move forward in discipleship with Jesus. And maybe it's time for you, if you've already been following Jesus, to awaken in a new way to the cost of following Jesus and what is God asking you to do. As a pastor, I can't say this is what it all looks like for us. We can do that over coffee. We can play around with it and mess around with it, and I can talk about some of the things I've discovered over time. But I'm in my own journey of what cost looks like. I'm my own journey of what Jesus is saying to me about laying down my life to follow Jesus. It's an ongoing thing. It's not an arrival. There's no destination at this point. It's an ongoing surrender. Maybe part of it is that you've been following Jesus in isolation on your own because of past hurt or disappointment or uncertainty. I would just say maybe the next step for you is like you need to root your discipleship with Jesus in the context of community. That is the way it is. That is the way Jesus established it. And it is imperfect and inefficient, and I guarantee at some point we will hurt each other and need to be honest and ask for forgiveness. We don't always get it right, but that is rooted, this personal decision needs to be rooted in community, and that's what we're about. We're about a community of messy followers of Jesus trying together to decide what does it look like for us to be a light, to follow Jesus here in this neighborhood, in this part of our city, and for our region. What does that look like? And the last thing is, I would just encourage you to consider what counting the cost looks like. What is the thing that God is asking you to give up in order for you to move forward into a more deeper expression of intimacy with God? So here's what I'm going to do. I just want to give you a moment just to pause and consider. The band's going to come back up. We're going to sing to close. But I just want you to think, what is it costing you to follow Jesus? What does costly discipleship look like for you? And if there's anything that's stirring, please reach out. If we can help in any way or have a conversation, a phone call, a coffee this week. It's a good thing, a tough thing for us to wrestle. So we start with laughing about mullets, but now I'm asking you, like, what is it costing you to follow Jesus? It's kind of a really serious end, but it's an important end for us to consider, okay? Let's just pause for a moment. So God, we just read this ancient text from thousands of years ago about a group of people who were wrestling and trying in their own way to figure out what following God, living up, aligning themselves with the way of God looked like. And in that context, it was a series of rules and an outline of this special vow. For us today as followers of Jesus, we are in our own way trying to count the cost and figure out what does it mean to surrender our whole lives to you, to take seriously this choice to follow you, the vow, the commitment we have made. But we need to do that, God. What does it mean to give our whole lives for you and to move in that direction? Maybe we're not fully there, but to give more and more of ourselves into the mission and the purpose in the kingdom of God. So whatever you're saying to my friends in this room, however you're inspiring or challenging or teaching or awakening in them, God, would you keep doing that? I believe you're present by your Spirit and speaking to each one of us. It's this beautiful mystery of who you are, God. And so work and teach and awaken and convict and lead us, God. We are open and clear that we want to continue to become more and more like Jesus day after day after day. And it is a struggle sometimes, it's a joy sometimes, but we do it together for your glory, for your honor. As a light in this city, so more may find Jesus, God, use us. Amen.